What's up, guys? This is Warhawk Beyond 2040 in the house, once again bringing to you yet another awesome yet crazy theory. And today I'm going to be talking about how I would bring in Static Shock into the Arrowverse. And I'm also going to be talking about how we could make this happen, because I feel that with all the different DC characters that have been introduced over the years, this is one guy that's never really been talked about that much, and I don't even think he's been mentioned in terms of who else they could bring in to TV. Since the beginning, Static Shock has quietly built himself a strong following among comic book fans and hardcore geeks like myself, but when I first came to know about Static Shock, I didn't even know he had a comic book. I had no idea he was from DC. The first time I became aware of Static Shock, I think, was back in 2004, when the show used to get shown on Toonami, and there was nothing wrong with him. I thought, oh, he's just a normal kid with a little bit of superpowers, and it was a very generic kids show. And I remember the first episode that I saw of Static Shock was when Virgil went back to the future and he met Terry McGinnis and Bruce Wayne. And from that moment, my mind was completely blown away, because I came to realise that, oh, Static Shock is in the same universe as the DCAU, because I didn't really get to see much of the show when it was shown here. I saw maybe a couple of episodes here and there, but I wasn't really familiar with the TV show that much. So I did my homework on Static Shock, and I found out he was indeed from the old DC comic books. So he had been around for quite a long time, but I had no idea who he was. And just recently I bought the DVDs, and for a cartoon that doesn't really get talked about that much when it comes to the DCAU, I found Static Shock to be a lot of fun, at times maybe a little bit dark, which seems to be the case with a lot of DCAU cartoons, especially in the early 2000s side of their history. And I found it to be a really fun show. It was so good, and some of my best episodes was from the 4th season of Static Shock, especially ones with Batman and Batman Beyond, and I think there was even one with Jon Stewart, the Green Lantern. That was also another one of my favourite episodes, and it was such a really cool yet hip kind of show, and it was one of those cartoons that anyone could watch, and I really liked it. And the fact that Static Shock lasted for over 4 seasons tells you just how much this show went down well with a lot of fans worldwide. And also the moments where I felt Static Shock left his mark on me and left a hell of an impression was in the Once and Future Thing Part 2, back in the JLU animated series, and he got to team up with both Batman, Warhawk, and the Green Lantern, and Wonder Woman, and an older Bruce Wayne. And that episode left such a huge impression on me, because not only did we get to see Static Shock Beyond, but we also got to see him in his 60s, and he kicked a lot of ass. And I felt that, it just showed you how important Static Shock is, not only to the DCAU, but to DC Comics overall. Which now brings me to how I would bring in Static Shock into the Arrowverse. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a different way I'm going to do this compared to other characters I've talked about in the past. I would introduce Virgil Hawkins first, without any powers. I would introduce him as just merely a high school student who also attends Garfield High. Now, for many of you out there that don't know Garfield High, that's right everyone, I would introduce Virgil Hawkins into Black Lightning. Now, what you could have is Virgil is trying to adapt to life after the passing of his mum, and his dad is good friends with Jefferson Pierce, who we all know is Black Lightning and is the principal of the school. And I would also have Virgil already know Jefferson's daughters, so they're already familiar with him, so there's a little bit of familiarity already. And Jefferson's trying to be more of a mentor figure to Virgil as he adapts to a new life without his mum and a new school. So he's been there for about maybe a couple of weeks or so. And Virgil's way of trying to fit in would be joining a street gang, much to the dismay of his dad and Jefferson. So what you could also have is, now I know this is very similar to the animated series, so we're going with this one, but there's going to be some little bit of changes. So one night he goes out with his so-called new friends in this gang, and they break into a chemical plant, and the gang say to Virgil that this is your initiation process. If you break in and steal something from this chemical plant, you're in. Black Lightning breaks up the robbery, and during all the commotion and the chaos, Virgil gets accidentally exposed to a radioactive chemical and also gets electrocuted indirectly by Black Lightning. So this causes him to go into a coma, and nobody knows if he lives or he dies. And Black Lightning tells Virgil's dad that I did everything I could to save your son, but the rest is up to the doctors. And before he leaves, a surge of static, pun intended, charges Virgil's genetic makeup and DNA, wakes him up out of his coma, and he's gone. And the Pierce's sisters tell Gamby and their dad that Virgil's gone missing, we don't know where to find him. The nurses say that there was this big flash of light and he was gone. So they try to look for him, and they find Virgil in an alleyway shaking and saying, I don't know how I got these powers, how did this happen, and, what's going on, why is this happening to me, I didn't do anything wrong, I don't deserve these powers. So they take him back, and they learn that during the robbery, the radioactive and the lightning powers from Black Lightning must have done something to him. So that in turn causes Virgil to have these powers, and everyone tries to say to Virgil that why not use these powers for good? And at first Virgil refuses because he feels that he's cursed. So Virgil refuses Black Lightning's help, and he goes out on his own and creates his own costume, and there you have it, he becomes Static Shock. Now, what I could have for Virgil Hawkins, who now is obviously Static Shock, you could have Gamby and Jefferson trying to be there for him, trying to mentor him and learn how he can control his powers. Now, I wouldn't have him necessarily join their little team because he feels he's not ready to take that step just yet. But you could have a situation where Black Lightning is mentoring Static Shock to use his powers for good and learn how to control them, and Black Lightning could say, well, I'll tell you what we could do. You may not have to join us, but we can help you get payback on this gang that left you basically to die. And they work together and they stop the gang and put them away, and they're sent to prison. and at the end of that you could have Static Shock saying, you know, maybe there is something I can learn from you, but if it's okay with you, I want to find out my own way. But if you ever need anything from me, just give me a call. I'm only a call away. And there you have it. That's how I would bring Static Shock into Black Lightning. Now, also, in terms of the Arrowverse, you could have Static Shock appear in Crisis. Why not? You know, every DC character is coming into Crisis. You could have him appear in Crisis. Maybe not in a big role, but I think you could have Static Shock in the future. So, just like in the DCAU, Static Shock Beyond. So we could have that in the Arrowverse, just maybe 50 years in the future, and he's much older. So that could be another way you could bring Static Shock into the Arrowverse. So you could have that set after the events of Black Lightning. So he's still Static Shock, he's already been part of the Justice League, and he's still out there fighting crime and still doing what he does best, and that's cracking jokes and having a good time, and that could be another way you could do that. So that's it, everyone. That's my way of bringing Static Shock into the Arrowverse and into the Black Lightning TV show. How would you do this? Is this how you would bring Static Shock, or is there another way you would do it? So I'm going to leave this here for all of you. Take care, everybody. I hope you enjoyed listening to this theory, and there'll be plenty more things coming up in the next day or two, or the next week or so. And I will see you all next time. Take care.